All right. Rockford Reading Daily, Day 6, Episode 6. We are reading Have Black Lives Ever Mattered by Mumia Abu-Jamal. Ooh, trying to get this cord moved. Hopefully that ain't too much of an annoying noise. Okay, let's pick up on page 59. Next passage is entitled Trying to Survive to 90 While Black. December 2nd, 2006. It's boys' night out, and a group of brothers is holding a bachelor's party at a neighborhood club. One of them is particularly thrilled because his marriage to the woman he loves is just hours away. But he will never marry because a pack of wild undercover cops will execute him with the deadly onslaught of 50 bullets fired at him and his friends. The crime? Cruising while black. Sean Bell, unarmed, died single at 23. And the spectacle media explained it away, saying it may have been a case of, quote, contagious, end quote, shooting. One cop fires, two cops fire, the three cops. Get the picture? It's a kind of social illness, like alcoholism. But neither Sean Bell, Trent Benefield, nor Joseph Guzman was armed. According to some reports, one of them said he was armed. Like the madmen who launched a preemptive war on the unsubstantiated claim of weapons of mass destruction, undercover cops launched an urban preemptive war on unarmed young black men, reportedly based on unsubstantiated suspicions. 50 shots fired. Homicide and serious injury. No cell phones, no wallets, no candy bars to mistake for a threat, for such trifles are no longer deemed necessary. In America, blackness is sufficient threat to warrant that whites use lethal force. Even maleness isn't required, as shown by the recent shooting of an elderly woman who allegedly allowed a drug dealer to use her home. Katherine Johnston, Katherine Johnston, having lived almost 90 years, was shot to death while trying to defend her Atlanta home after it was attacked by undercover cops. According to a neighborhood snitch, he never claimed her house was a drug site, despite police pressure to do so. No significant quantities of drugs were found at the home. What was her crime? Trying to survive to 90 while black? What's more dangerous, drugs or armed undercover cops kicking in doors looking for bad guys? Police suspicion, it seems, is a weapon of urban war. Several years ago, writer Christian Williams noted a case in which a whole community was held under siege because of police suspicion. In his remarkable 2003 book, Enemies in Blue, Police and Power in America, Williams recounted an amazing story. The racial politics of police suspicion are well illustrated by the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation's, quote, Operation Ready Rock, end quote. In November 1990, 45 state cops, including K-9 units and the paramilitary special response team, laid siege to the 100 block of Graham Street in the black neighborhood of Chapel Hill. Searching for crack cocaine, the cops sealed off the streets, patrolled with dogs, and ransacked the neighborhood pool hall. In terms of crime control, the mission was a flop. Although nearly 100 people were detained and searched, only 13 were arrested and one of them convicted. Nevertheless, and despite a successful class action lawsuit, the cops defended their performance and no officers were disciplined. When applying for a warrant to search every person and vehicle on the block, the police had assured the judge, quote, there are no innocent people at this place. Only drug sellers and drug buyers are on the described premises, end quote. But once the clampdown was underway, that became more discriminating. Blacks were detained and searched, sometimes at gunpoint, while whites were permitted to leave the cordoned area. How many of the armed employees of the state who shot Johnston, Bell, Guzman, or Benefield will ever feel their wrists manacled together see the inside of a cell, or experience the despair of death row? We know the answer because we've seen this movie before. Paid leave, which amounts to paid vacations, a whitewash of an investigation, and a quote, "they were doing their jobs," end quote, are all that ever happens. It's a damn shame. And that ends our passage, and that ends the passage of trying to survive 90 while black. Trying to survive to 90 while black. And I think my first, here, let me get a little situated. Around a little bit. Move the mic. Sorry, y'all. I think my first thought reading that was, I remember the story of Sean Bell from being younger and hearing that story. It was a story that I knew before I really understood how often these issues took place. It was a story I knew before Trayvon, or heard about before Trayvon Martin, and rappers, hearing hip-hop artists and rappers from New York talk about it in songs. Was something that was a place that I heard about Sean Bell from. And I think also the amount of shots, the 50 shots, was always something that was always spoken about as an example of just the excessive nature, even in the force, even in it being deadly force and excessive force, the excessiveness of that excessive force, I think, is illustrated with the 50 shots in the car of Sean Bell. And then I had never heard the story about the grandmother. It's possible she was someone's grandmother, but the black woman in Atlanta. Let me look back. Did they give her a name? Sorry, that's it. Katherine Johnson. Excuse me. I never heard the story of Katherine Johnston before. But again, one of the things that we've learned, even in Rockford, is that these issues are not, even though the institutions may be prejudiced, these issues are not prejudiced. They're not discriminatory. A 90-year-old black woman, a 50-year-old white woman, different people, different religions, different sexual orientations, police terrorism and mass incarceration and racial injustice have ballooned to the point where even the people who may not have been the intended targets of those things have fallen into the crosshairs of these issues when they manifest. And I think that is one of the things that we must form solidarity and unity on. We have 15 memorials down here at Say Their Name Square, and 13 of them are black people, or people of color, black people. 12 of them are black people. One is a Latino male, and then the other two are white people. And so even though these issues in this city predominantly, the macro aggressions have predominantly and disproportionately affected black people, they have still affected people from other communities and of other races, other ethnicities. And so I think that's one of the things that's pointed out. Same thing with age. We have the youngest person on the memorials is 16 out here. The youngest person that we've documented that the police department have and the law enforcement in this area have killed is 16, little Mike Sago Jr., who was killed by an off-duty Winnebago County Sheriff deputy. And I believe Suzette Babler is the oldest person who was killed by a Loves Park Police Department officer, a white woman. And I believe she was in her 50s. And then we have all types of different age ranges in between there. And so this is something that even age can't escape just through age. And I had also never heard the story about the North Carolina State Bureau's Operation Ready Rock. But again, the police department operates in communities of color and in working class and low-end communities, or working class and poor communities, not low-end, but working class and poor communities. They operate as an occupying force, as an occupying army. And so it's not a surprise that these are the type of tactics that they would take. And then also, I think one of the things that we have to remember is the mentality of of these police officers, the ideologies of these police officers when they become part of these institutions. And one of the things that was noted in there that I think is important to highlight and think about is that the officers told the judge when they went to go get the warrant that there were no innocent people in this area. And a lot of times, that is something that these institutions truly believe, that just existing in a certain area or existing in a certain income bracket or existing while being a certain color makes you guilty. Okay, next passage. Death in a cell, January 12th, 2009. The strangulation death of 19-year-old Ronnie L. White in a jail cell in Upper Marlboro, Prince George's County, Maryland, after 36 hours of confinement, has confounded Ron Harris, the teenager's father. Mr. Harris recently told reporters, quote, "It's been 6 months and still nobody can tell me who killed my son or what happened leading up to his death," end quote. Harris added, quote, "I want to know why there is still so much secrecy in this case and why, after all this time, I still don't have answers," end quote. And despite the impanelment of a county grand jury looking into the case, the Harris family still has no answers, for the grand jury disbanded without bringing any indictments. Community groups from the People's Coalition for Police Accountability, the advocacy group Casa de Maryland, and the Prince George's County chapter of the NAACP have protested the death of Ronnie L. White, braving the bitter December winds to gather together to demand a true, fair, and impartial investigation into his death and the prosecution of all involved. That's because White died 36 hours after his arrest in connection with the death of a Prince George's County cop who was hit by a car allegedly driven by White. After the events of June 2008, White's father is left with little more than questions. Quote, "My son died in solitary confinement in the jail," end quote, Mr. Harris said. Quote, "They knew who was working in the unit and where he was that day. The doors were locked and only a few people had keys. Yet, after all this time, they say they don't have enough evidence to know who did it. Why not?" End quote. And that is the end of that passage. And then that makes me think of Geno Washington and Joseph McCormick. These are both people who died while in the custody of the Winnebago County Jail. There was no charges brought up on any of the correctional officers who were in the area or anybody who was in charge of the pods that they were in. They died 2 months, a month and a half to 2 months in between each other. I can't remember the dates offhand right now. I'm sorry about that. Again, Eugene, Geno Washington, Joseph McCormick. And so we've had similar experiences here. Geno Washington's family was told that he died of sleep apnea, but they were not given any transparency or true answers past that. And then Joseph McCormick's family was told that he died by suicide. But the Joseph McCormick's father said that he spoke to his son the day before this apparent suicide took place, and he was in good spirits, and that he told him he was going to talk to him later, and that he didn't believe his son committed suicide. And so we have also seen that the Winnebago County Jail is a place where these issues, these macroaggressions manifest. The people lose their lives. And every hour, every minute, every second, every minute, every hour, every day, there are microaggressions taking place inside of the Winnebago County Jail. And so those microaggressions are things such as unhealthy food being constantly fed to the inmates, living conditions, psychologically destructive living conditions, whether that be not seeing the sun or not being able to go outside or not having access to reading material and literature, not being able to see other, their families. It's all a bunch of things that are part of the punitive portions of the Winnebago County Jail are microaggressions that that happen to the inmates inside of there. And I think I think that we have to remember the difference between jail and prison. And it doesn't mean that when somebody's in prison, it's fine for these microaggressions to happen. But there is a difference between somebody who has in a jail, who has not been convicted of anything yet, or convicted of what they're being charged with yet, having these microaggressions and these possible macroaggressions taken out on them, that it is something different than somebody who has been convicted. And again, that's not saying one is better than the other or one is worse than the other or anything like that. That's not the conversation we're having. The conversation we're having is that it is a difference. It is a separation. And this young man, again, had not been found convicted, had not been found guilty or convicted for the death of the Prince George's County cop that it seems that he was arrested for, and that it seems he was then killed for. And too often, the judge, jury, and executioner are police officers in the streets or correctional officers inside of a jail. Okay. Oscar Grant and you, January 17th, 2009. Like you, I've seen the searing cell phone footage of the killing of 22-year-old Oscar Grant of Oakland, California. And although it's truly a horrific thing to see, it's almost exceeded by something just as disturbing: how commercial media have responded in defense of the police who killed him. This defense, that the killer cop who murdered Grant somehow mistook his loaded gun for his taser, has been offered by both local and national news reporters, even though they haven't heard word one from Johannes Mehzarel, the Bay Area rapid transit cop who wasn't interviewed for weeks after shooting and killing an unarmed man. Imagine this: if the roles were reversed, that is, if bystanders have footage of Oscar Grant shooting Officer Mehzarel, would the media be suggesting a defense for him? Would Grant have been free to roam, to leave the state a week later? Would he have made bail? The shooting of Oscar Grant III is but the latest West Coast version of Amadou Diallo, of Sean Bell, and of hundreds of other black men. And as with them, don't be surprised if there's an acquittal again. Oscar Grant is you, and you are him, because you know in the pit of your stomach that it could have been you, and the same thing could have happened. You know this. And what's worse is this: you pay for this every time. You pay taxes, and you would endorse this every time you vote for politicians who sell out in a heartbeat. You pay for your killers to kill you in the name of a bogus, twisted law, and then pay for the state that defends them. Something is terribly wrong here, and it's the system itself. Until the system is changed, nothing is changed. We'll just be out in the streets again, chanting a different name. The first time I heard about Oscar Grant was awaiting the verdict for the murder of Trayvon Martin, which took place, many years after Oscar Grant. Well, not many years. Not many years. But that was the first time I would hear about Oscar Grant. Now it's Fruitvale Station is a movie that's come out that a lot of people have seen. It got a lot of critical acclaim, and so the story of Oscar Grant is it's very known. It's a national story, and again, it's just the story of Oscar Grant just echoes into all of these stories. You know, in different areas and different types of institutional policing, but the same issues taking place and happening. And I think that one of the things that is important to point out is that these police officers are public employees. They do work for. They are paid by our taxes. They are paid by the citizens. They do work for us. The idea of protecting and serving is supposed to be for the same people that they are murdering and killing and assaulting, and I think that is an element that sometimes people don't think about. And even again, when they go to when they have legal representation, that's paid for by us. When these cities get sued and these counties get sued for these deaths that have happened at the hands of law enforcement, it is the taxpayers' money that goes to these families. Okay, let's knock out one more passage. The arrest of Harvard scholar Dr. Henry Louis Gates, July 30th, 2009. My fault, yo. If the arrest, humiliation, and resultant brouhaha over Harvard scholar Dr. Henry Louis Gates has taught us anything, it is that people in the United States still dwell in separate worlds, ones that rarely meet. And while some wags have rushed to tell us that the incident reveals little more than a continuous clash of class, I beg to differ. If anything, it shows us just the opposite. When it comes to black people of whatsoever wealth, status, class, or prominence, the usual rules don't apply. Indeed, handling blacks seems to always require exceptions to standards that apply to most everyone else. Consider this. Most Americans can agree with the familiar aphorism that, quote, a man's home is his castle, end quote. Not black men. How else could, quote, Skip, end quote, Gates get busted on his doorstep for disturbing a non-existent peace? In law, homeowners' property rights do not end at their front door. They extend all the way to the street, ending at the curb. This is in a preterite tense. Imagine if a person slips and falls on the sidewalk in front of a home. That person has a claim on the homeowner, not the city. Dr. Henry Louis Gates was busted not because he violated the law, but because he violated the emotions of the cop, Sergeant James Crowley, who entered his house. The policeman was angered when Dr. Gates initially refused to exit his house, and it angered him further when Professor Gates demanded that the public servant provide his identification. President Barack Obama was right when he called the policeman's arrest of Dr. Gates, quote, stupid, end quote. But, as usual, politics prevailed when rednecks responded with howls of protest. One need look no further than the email sent by Boston police officer and National Guardsman Justin Barrett, in which Officer Barrett descends to hate speech to refer to Dr. Gates as a, quote, banana-eating jungle monkey, end quote. Quote, at the time, Boston Police Commissioner Edward F. Davis vowed that there would be a termination hearing in 7 to 10 days, end quote, reported the Boston Globe. Quote, but 4 months later, Officer Justin Barrett, who was accused of writing an email that called Harvard professor Henry Louis Gates Jr., remains on administrative leave and is still collecting his $70,000 and $70,500 salary. Cops get paid vacation for their hate speech and bigotry. What do their victims get? Will a beer at the White House put this fire out? I doubt it, for it ignores what happens every day in dozens of states to countless men and women who don't have Harvard PhDs or friends in high places. The sad truth is, being black in America is akin to being born low caste in India, where separate and unequal rules remain, despite promises in their constitution. Barack Obama's presidency hasn't changed reality, but may mask it by providing cover for the ugly things that blacks endure in a nation where white elites claim a false, quote, post-racialism, end quote. A, quote, beer summit, end quote, on the lawn of the White House won't change that either. That gets us to the end of page 68, the end of that passage. And for those who don't know the story of Henry Louis Gates Jr., he was arrested by a police officer. He didn't commit any crime. The thing that stands out to me the most is that a lot of these, we're getting into the portion of these stories where Barack Obama is the president when these things are going on. Mami Abu-Jamal is starting to get into a closer to the time period that we are currently in with some of these issues. And I think that's one thing that has to be remembered is that the movement and the struggle for black lives began underneath a black president. And so it's clear that just representation or having black faces in high places is not enough to stop oppression and repression and injustice from coming down on black people. And simply inviting people to the White House, as he did with Henry Louis Gates Jr., or as Joe Biden did with the family of George Floyd, that is not justice. And it ignores the fact that it makes it seem as if these issues are individualistic or are individual problems. And the truth is that they're not. They are collective issues. They're collective problems. And we have to begin to address them as collective issues and collective problems if we ever want to absolve ourselves of these collective issues and collective problems. And so that's going to wrap us up for this Rockford Reading Daily, episode 6. I think this is episode 6. We're almost on a week of these Rockford Reading Dailies. I hope they've been beneficial to people and helpful for people. They've been beneficial and helpful for me to go through and do these readings, and to trying to slowly get back in the groove of communicating and articulating the issues more. Starting to get a little bit chilly out here. We're starting to get into the midst of the fall and the preparation for the winter. And so stay warm out there. And if you haven't listened to the previous episodes of Rockford Reading Daily, please go back and listen to the previous episodes. If you're listening to this and it's episodes from the future that have came out, please go and listen to those episodes that have come after this one. Please share this on whatever platform you're listening to it on. We outside.